The Tokyo skyline blurred through rain-streaked windows as 3 security alerts flashed on my phone. Someone was locking me out of systems I'd built over a decade. It was 3 a.m., and halfway across the world, Rachel was executing her betrayal. My hands remained steady as I initiated commands I'd prepared years ago, but hoped never to use. I had 15 minutes before her board meeting began. 15 minutes to activate digital tripwires hidden throughout our company's architecture. As confirmation messages appeared, a strange calm settled over me. While most would panic or rage, I watched my contingency protocols silently catalog Rachel's every move, each file accessed, each permission changed, each supposedly private communication. She believed she was erasing my legacy, but was actually documenting her treachery. Her message arrived. James, the board voted for your termination. Your belongings have been sent to storage. Sorry, but it's just business. I smiled. Rachel had always underestimated me, seeing only the technical genius, never the strategist. She thought she was ending our story, but had merely triggered the first phase of a plan I'd spent 5 years perfecting. I read the server access revocation notice sitting in Seattle International Airport after an 18-hour flight from Tokyo. The follow-up message from Rachel arrived seconds later. James, the board voted for your termination. Your belongings have been sent to storage. Sorry, but it's just business. 10 years of leading a company I built from nothing ended with one email and a cold IT notification. The bitter coffee in my hand suddenly tasted like ash. My name is James Elliott, 52, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of a cutting-edge tech firm in Seattle. I was returning from successful negotiations with Japanese investors that had secured a $45 million contract for our company. Rachel Clark, my business partner and CFO, had used my absence to convince the board to vote me out. I finished my coffee, turned off my phone, and headed toward the exit. The persistent rain matched my mood perfectly. 10 years of working side by side, hundreds of sleepless nights, 3 generations of innovative software, all ended with betrayal from the person I had trusted without question. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just hours earlier, I had been toasting with executives in Tokyo, securing what would be our company's biggest international expansion. The contract I'd negotiated would have increased our market valuation by at least 30%. Now I was effectively locked out of my own creation. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a hotel downtown, not my home. I needed time to think, to process what had happened. As the cab navigated through rain-slicked streets, I scrolled through my emails one last time before my corporate account access expired. There it was, meeting minutes from a board session I'd missed while in Asia 3 weeks ago. Rachel had introduced a strategic restructuring plan that subtly shifted executive power. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, perhaps even years. The cab pulled up to the hotel, and I paid the driver with a generous tip. Inside my room, I placed my luggage in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, but I didn't feel the panic or rage one might expect. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. What Rachel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had always expected something like this might happen. In the tech industry, loyalty is worth less than stock options before an IPO. I opened my laptop and connected to a secure server that existed outside our corporate infrastructure. With a few keystrokes, I accessed files that documented the true history of our company's development. Files that Rachel had no idea existed. I wasn't going down without a fight, and I had been quietly preparing my defenses for years. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Rachel's education in the dangers of betraying someone who thinks 3 steps ahead. 6 months earlier, our chief counsel Mike Donovan had pulled me aside after a board meeting and said something that should have set off alarm bells. James, have you noticed that Rachel rescheduled 3 key venture capital meetings to dates when you were traveling? I brushed it off as coincidence, a quirk of our busy schedules. Now, sitting alone in my hotel room, I realized that had been the first warning I chose to ignore. I met Rachel at a Stanford conference in 2013. I was the technical genius with ideas. She was the MBA graduate with business acumen and connections. We founded our company in a small Seattle office, starting with a team of 5 people. The early years we worked like a well-oiled machine. I created the technology, she attracted investors. By 2018, our company had grown to 120 employees, and our valuation had reached $200 million. Then the changes began. Rachel started insisting on bringing in strategic investors, who, as I later discovered, had connections to our competitor. She began hiring executives from their former team. Our conversations about technical strategy devolved into arguments about commercialization. Twice she attempted to modify our intellectual property agreement. I attributed these changes to the natural evolution of a growing business, convincing myself that adaptation was necessary for success. Our weekly lunch meetings, once filled with enthusiastic planning, became shorter and more formal. Rachel started taking calls outside the office, lowering her voice when I walked by. She began excluding me from investor meetings, claiming they were just financial discussions that would bore me. The executive team, once balanced between my technical allies and her business contacts, gradually shifted as she brought in more of her people. The balance of power was tilting, but I was too focused on product development to notice the political maneuvering. The company Christmas party in 2022 should have been another warning. Rachel gave a speech thanking everyone for their contributions, but when mentioning me, she referred to my role in the past tense. James's initial vision, and the foundation James built. Several employees noticed and mentioned it to me later. I laughed it off as poor word choice after too much champagne. Now I recognized it for what it was. The beginning of a narrative that I was becoming obsolete. In March 2023, Rachel proposed a corporate restructuring that she claimed would optimize operational expenses. I agreed, not realizing I was signing documents that gave the board the power to terminate founders with a majority vote. When I questioned a clause about executive removal, she assured me it was standard language that investors expected. I trusted her legal expertise and signed. That was my biggest mistake, allowing someone else to interpret legal documents that would later be used against me. The afternoon before my flight to Tokyo, Rachel had stopped by my office. "Good luck with the negotiations," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Don't worry about things here. I'll handle everything while you're gone." Those words replayed in my mind with new meaning. She hadn't been wishing me success. She'd been saying goodbye, knowing I wouldn't return to the same position. I had walked straight into her trap, leaving the company vulnerable exactly when she needed me out of the way to execute her plan. As dawn broke over Seattle, I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust implicitly, my brother, a cybersecurity expert who had warned me about Rachel years ago. "It's happened," I said when he answered. Rachel made her move. His response was calm, measured. "Have you activated Protocol Safeguard?" I hadn't yet, but within the hour, systems that Rachel didn't even know existed would begin quietly collecting the evidence I would need to reclaim what was rightfully mine. In my home office in Bellevue, I unlocked a safe hidden behind a bookshelf and retrieved an external hard drive that no one, including Rachel, knew existed. It contained material that could either destroy our company or return control to me, depending on how I chose to use it. This wasn't a hastily assembled contingency. It was the result of years of careful documentation and strategic foresight. After my conversation with our legal counsel months ago, I had begun quietly taking precautions. I created backups of all source codes, architectural solutions, and patent applications. Most of these materials had been developed personally by me before the company's official foundation. I recovered email correspondence with investors dating back to before meeting Rachel. While traveling for business, I met with industry experts and attorneys specializing in corporate conflicts. Through my brother, who worked in cybersecurity, I gained access to company servers and set up automatic backups of critical data. When Rachel began changing passwords to corporate accounts, I already had authorized access through alternative systems. All this preparation happened quietly, without changes to my normal behavior or work schedule. My caution wasn't born from paranoia, but from experience. My first startup had been acquired by a larger company, and I'd watched as the founding team was systematically pushed out once the technology was secured. I had vowed never to be vulnerable again. Over the years, I'd constructed a series of legal and technical safeguards, creating separate LLCs for key intellectual property, documenting my pre-company work, and establishing clear ownership trails for critical technologies. Rachel, focused on financial structures and investor relations, had never bothered to understand the technical architecture that made our products valuable. I spent the afternoon studying the board's termination document that had been attached to the email. They had cited strategic differences and failure to align with the company's commercial direction as reasons for my removal. There was no mention of misconduct or incompetence. They couldn't fabricate those charges given my track record. This was purely a power play, and the justification was thin enough that it might not withstand legal scrutiny if challenged properly. But I didn't want a prolonged legal battle that would damage the company I'd built. I wanted a surgical resolution that would expose Rachel's actions while preserving the organization's value. By evening, I had established a secure communication channel with 3 board members who had been recruited early in our company's history. People who knew my true contribution and might be sympathetic to my situation once they understood the full picture. I didn't reach out yet. Timing would be critical. First, I needed to understand exactly what Rachel had told them and what she was planning next. For that, I needed inside information from the company I was no longer allowed to enter. I called Angela, my executive assistant for the past 8 years. Her loyalty had been to me personally, not the corporate structure. After explaining the situation, I asked if she would be willing to be my eyes and ears. Her response confirmed why I had always trusted her judgment. She asked for time to consider the ethical implications, but promised to let me know by morning. I respected her caution. Blind loyalty without moral consideration was what had brought Rachel and me to this impasse. While waiting for Angela's decision, I activated a special protocol developed years earlier. Every server in the company simultaneously received a signal for a critical security update. This was a legitimate security feature I had built into our systems with full board approval, designed to protect our intellectual property in case of emergency. What the board didn't know was that it also initiated a complete backup of all system activities to a secure external location, creating an unalterable record of every file access, modification, and communication. If Rachel was planning to alter records or remove evidence of her actions, it would now be documented beyond her reach. As midnight approached, my phone lit up with a message from Angela. "I'm in. Meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m., usual coffee shop." The first piece of my counter-strategy was falling into place. But even as I prepared for battle, a part of me mourned the partnership that had once seemed unbreakable. Rachel had been more than a business partner. She had been a friend I trusted with my life's work. That trust was now shattered beyond repair, and in its place grew a cold determination to protect what I had built, not just for myself, but for every employee whose livelihood depended on our company's survival. 1 week after my termination, I walked into our largest investor's office. His secretary tried to stop me, but John Pearson, seeing me through the glass wall, gestured for me to enter. "James, what the hell is happening with the company systems? Clients are panicking, and the stock is plunging," he said. I placed a folder of documents and a USB drive before him, containing evidence that would change everything. The protocol I had activated did not damage company data, but triggered a hidden function in the software. Every client received a notification about a potential security breach. This was a legal safeguard I had embedded in the system and approved by the legal department in the early stages. The market reacted immediately. Shares fell 17% in 1 day. Simultaneously, I met with key investors, showing them evidence that Rachel had been conducting secret negotiations about a merger with our main competitor. The agreement proposed selling key technologies at an undervalued price and massive employee layoffs. My evidence included email correspondence, bank transfers to offshore accounts, and meeting minutes that the board had never been informed about. John spent nearly an hour reviewing my documentation, his expression growing darker with each page. The evidence was irrefutable. Rachel had been systematically preparing to sell our core technology to competitors, while positioning herself for a lucrative role in the merged entity. The loan documents revealed a pattern of financial misrepresentation that bordered on fraud. What made it particularly damning was that she had used company resources to facilitate these negotiations, a clear violation of her fiduciary duty. When he finally looked up, His decision was written across his face. He reached for his phone and instructed his assistant to call an emergency board meeting for the following morning. I had spent years building a reputation for integrity in an industry often lacking it. This reputation now served me well, as John and other key investors were inclined to believe my evidence rather than dismiss it as the desperate act of a terminated executive. I explained that I hadn't come seeking personal vindication, but to prevent the dismantling of a company that employed hundreds of people and had created genuine technological value. My proposed solution was targeted: remove Rachel, investigate the attempted merger, and reinstate me temporarily to stabilize operations and reassure clients. After John agreed to support my proposal, I met with 3 other investors who collectively controlled enough voting power to sway the board. The reaction was uniformly one of shock followed by strategic calculation. No one wanted to see their investment devalued through Rachel's maneuvering. By sunset, I had secured tentative support from stakeholders representing over 60% of voting shares. The tide was turning, but I remained cautious. Rachel was nothing if not resourceful, and I expected her to fight back with everything she had once she realized her plans were exposed. That evening, I received an unexpected visit at my hotel from David Chen, our head of product development and one of my original team members. He had been deliberately excluded from the board meeting where my termination was decided, despite his senior position. David revealed that Rachel had been systematically alienating my allies within the company, reassigning them to peripheral projects or pressuring them to leave. She had created a narrative that I was blocking the company's commercial progress, more interested in technical elegance than market success. More disturbingly, she had begun interviewing replacements for key technical roles, people with connections to our competitor, 2 months before my trip to Japan. Armed with this additional information, I refined my strategy for the board meeting. This wasn't just about reclaiming my position. It was about saving the company from being hollowed out and sold for parts. As I prepared my presentation for the morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Back off now, or things will get much worse for you." It could only have come from Rachel, or someone in her circle. She knew I was making moves, which meant someone in my confidence had alerted her. The circle of trust had just grown smaller, but my resolve had only strengthened. Before going to bed, I made one final call to my attorney, confirming that everything was in place for the morning. "Remember," he cautioned, "go in with facts, not emotions. The moment you make this personal, you lose credibility." It was sound advice. Despite the betrayal that burned in my chest, this needed to be handled with clinical precision. As I laid out my suit for the morning, I realized that tomorrow would determine not just my future, but the future of every person who had trusted in the vision Rachel and I had once shared. I would not let them down, even if it meant confronting the person who had once been my closest ally. The boardroom was filled to capacity when I arrived. Rachel sat at the head of the table, confident in her victory. When I entered, she paled as though seeing a ghost. "What is he doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. John Pearson, our lead investor, stood and addressed the room, explaining that serious allegations had emerged requiring immediate attention. The atmosphere shifted instantly from routine business to tense anticipation. For the next hour, I methodically presented my evidence without emotion. Documents about secret negotiations with our competitor, financial transactions, modified board reports. I showed how Rachel had been systematically preparing for a merger that would benefit her personally, while devaluing shareholder investments and endangering employee positions. The technical documentation revealed how she had attempted to partition our intellectual property, separating valuable assets into entities that could be more easily transferred in a merger. Email records showed her communication with competitor executives dating back 14 months, well before any board discussions about potential market consolidation. Rachel attempted to defend herself, calling my actions the revenge of a terminated co-founder who couldn't accept the company's evolution. But when legal counsel confirmed the authenticity of the documents, and an external financial analyst verified the irregularities in transaction reports, her defense crumbled. The most damning evidence came when our head of security confirmed unauthorized access to secure development servers from Rachel's credentials during times she was supposedly in meetings. access that had resulted in complete downloads of our proprietary algorithms. Board members who had voted for my termination now sat in uncomfortable silence, realizing they had been manipulated with selective information. The chairman, a veteran tech investor, asked Rachel directly about specific offshore transfers that had never been reported to the finance committee. Her explanation about exploratory market research contradicted documented communications about extraction of key assets pre-announcement. It was the moment her credibility shattered completely. The board voted unanimously to suspend Rachel pending a full investigation and to reinstate me as acting CEO until a permanent leadership solution could be determined. As the meeting concluded, shareholders expressed their relief that the situation had been exposed before irreversible damage occurred. Several apologized for not scrutinizing Rachel's proposals more carefully, admitting they had been swayed by impressive quarterly returns without questioning the sustainability of her strategies. As Rachel gathered her belongings, she stopped beside me and whispered, "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This isn't over." I met her gaze calmly and replied that security would escort her from the building. In that moment, looking into her eyes, I recognized something I had missed during our years working together. A cold calculation that had always been present but concealed beneath charm and collaborative rhetoric. This was never about building something meaningful. For her, it had always been about power and personal gain. After Rachel left, I addressed the board about immediate priorities, reassuring clients, stabilizing internal operations, and conducting a thorough security audit. I emphasized that my return was not about personal vindication, but about protecting the company's integrity and the livelihoods of our employees. John Pearson voiced his full support, and others quickly aligned. By meeting's end, we had an action plan to address the damage Rachel had caused and strategies to prevent similar vulnerabilities in the future. As I left the boardroom, my phone buzzed with messages from employees who had heard about the dramatic reversal. Many expressed relief and renewed commitment to our original vision. But amid these positive responses, one message gave me pause. An anonymous text reading, "She's already contacted legal representation specializing in defamation. Watch your back." The victory had been swift, but I knew better than to believe the war was over. Rachel had built her own network of allies, both inside and outside the company. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and I needed to be prepared for whatever countermove she was already planning. 1 year later, I stood on stage at a technology conference in San Francisco, presenting our company's new platform. In the front row sat investors who had nearly lost millions due to Rachel's betrayal. My presentation received a standing ovation. The company hadn't just survived, it had emerged stronger from the crisis. Rebuilding after the upheaval had been challenging. The investigation revealed the full extent of the damage. Rachel had been preparing the deal for over a year, manipulating financial reports and alienating key employees. Our competitor received an official warning from regulatory authorities about their role in the attempted corporate raid. 3 board members implicated in the scheme resigned. I had to restructure the company, restore client trust, and rebuild investor confidence. My experience attracted industry attention. I was invited to speak at several conferences about corporate ethics and intellectual property protection. The company not only recovered its position, but established new partnerships with the Japanese investors I had been negotiating with on the day of my termination. As for Rachel, she left the technology sector and reportedly moved to Europe. The legal aftermath continued for months. Rachel filed a defamation lawsuit, claiming I had fabricated evidence to orchestrate a hostile takeover. The case was dismissed when forensic analysis confirmed the authenticity of all documents presented to the board. 3 former employees loyal to Rachel attempted to remove proprietary code before leaving, triggering the very security protocols I had established years earlier. The attempted theft was documented automatically, resulting in legal consequences that served as a powerful deterrent to others. What surprised me most was discovering that Rachel had approached our competitor with an acquisition proposal 9 months before my trip to Japan. The betrayal had been in motion far longer than I had imagined. The company culture transformed during the recovery process. We implemented transparency measures that made similar manipulation nearly impossible. Executive decisions required documented rationales accessible to all board members. Financial transactions above certain thresholds needed multiple authorizations. Most importantly, we established ethics guidelines with clear reporting channels for concerns. These changes weren't just reactive protections. They created a stronger organization built on trust and shared purpose, rather than centralized control. My relationship with the board evolved as well. The crisis had exposed weaknesses in our governance that, once addressed, created more effective collaboration. Several members who had voted for my termination became my strongest allies, appreciative of the measured response that had protected everyone's interests, rather than seeking personal vengeance. When we eventually hired a new CFO, the selection process involved rigorous vetting of not just professional qualifications, but ethical track record and alignment with our company values. On a personal level, the experience changed me profoundly. The betrayal could have left me bitter and distrustful, but instead, it clarified what truly mattered. I had built safeguards not from paranoia, but from prudence, and that foresight had protected not just my position, but the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. The company wasn't just a business entity. It was a community of people working toward shared goals. Preserving that community proved more meaningful than any vindication against Rachel. One evening, I sat on the deck of my home in Bellevue, watching the sunset over Lake Washington. My phone was silenced, my laptop closed. For the first time in years, I felt not just professional satisfaction, but inner peace. Rachel's betrayal could have destroyed everything I had worked for, but instead, it had made both me and the company stronger. I felt no schadenfreude or desire for revenge, only gratitude for the lesson and freedom to move forward. Sometimes the best strategy isn't loud confrontation, but quiet preparation and patience. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but success built upon the ruins of betrayal. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.